Not till then? Okay, charging right along. This is item 9B. Discussion and consideration to direct planning and zoning staff and commission on future action of the oil and gas ordinance. There ought to be a period there, forwarded back to the planning and zoning commission.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we open that for discussion.
Okay, and could we have a second?
Second.
All right. So, does staff have any, where'd the staff go? He was here a minute ago. Do you have any comment on this in terms of, then we'll move ahead and listen to the public.
I'm here to answer questions.
Okay. Stand ready. Or sit down and be ready. Okay, let's see. Discussion and consideration for the planning and zoning. The third person on the list is Wendy Cox. The first two people are invisible. You were hoping somebody else would put their name in before you, is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I want to say thank you again for your service, and I think you really made the right decision to push us back to planning and zoning. I think you really did the right thing.
Could you lean into that microphone? We don't
I
want to
think
miss
you made the right
pearl.
decision to push this back to planning and zoning. This is a very important issue, and we have a lot of interest and comments on this, from this. So and I'm only going to speak briefly because last month I went over my time, so I'd like to speak briefly this time. Chairman Chapman said something last time. He said we have a moral obligation to assist with jobs, particularly regarding, I think it was called GeoBrug. And I was taken by that because I think that jobs are what is important here in this county. We really need to be assisting our citizens at every level with finding jobs. So in that vein, and as we continue forward discussing this issue of the oil and gas ordinance, I would like to say that the recently published Department of Energy report to 2017 Energy and Employment Report shows that clean electricity jobs are no doubt the engine that drives America's electric energy economy, outstripping the number of paychecks provided by the fossil fuel industry by at least 5 to 1. This is a DOE report. While that doesn't mean fossil fuel generation is gone, it certainly means that if you are a politician looking for ways to grow jobs for the long term, your community, clean energy is the path to take. And the other thing I'd like to say is that from Fortune magazine said renewable energy is creating jobs 12 times faster than the rest of the economy. And the solar and wind industries are each creating jobs at a rate 12 times faster than the rest of the U.S. economy, according to that news report. So I'd just like to plant that little seed in your head as these conversations go forward, and realize it's not about fossil fuels as much as it needs to be renewables. And thank you so much for taking a second look at this issue.
Thank you. Matthew, if you keep showing up on this list, pretty soon I'm going to get your last name right.
Gentlemen, this is nothing more than 1 gallon of water already cleared with the Sheriff's Department. I'm just going to let it sit here. Again, Matthew Eldringhoff, Rio Rancho, Enchanted Hills, retired military. The reason I brought this up here is just to represent the precious natural resource that this commission is going to trade for oil and gas. And I'm going to offer a challenge to this commission right now. I'd like to know from one member of this commission how many millions of gallons of water is used in a single fracking well. Does anyone know that? Anyone? Mr. Block? Commissioner Block, excuse me. 8 million? Actually, the average is about 5, but 8 is on the high end. That's my point I'm trying to make. You know, the last time it rained, at least in Rio Rancho, I want to say it was one time between the last meeting that we had. Okay? This is not a hypothetical. This is not a possibility. It's a fact. Not possible contamination, not possible pollution. It's a simple fact. And when that water is used, that water is gone. Period. Actually, correction, it has one use for re-injection. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, next on the list is Gregory Bergmark.
Thanks for letting me speak here. I'm not going to speak too much, I don't think, because I have a 9-page, I'm from Peña Blanca, and Commissioner Holden-Rhodes, you have sent out a 9-page excellent piece of information and list of things that you're going to do. Are you going to discuss these things?
Can you speak into the mic?
Okay, can you hear me?
I'm a little hard of hearing, so thanks.
Okay. Anyway, if you're going to cover all this material tonight, I just gave a thought to putting it into the record, if that's all right. 1st of January, 3 pages, and 2nd of January, 1 page, 3rd, 3 pages, and an attachment, and then the last one, moving ahead, Aquifer ONG 2018. One thing that attracted my attention here is lastly, the 9th one. Lastly, I'm opposed to and will vote against any motion to address in any way, shape, or manner a move to send the Heil-Stoddard ordinances back to the Sandoval County P&Z Board. Such a benighted move would be an exercise in futility and a major slap in the face of we the people. I thought that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. And persons 6, 7, and 8, they're invisible. That leaves number 9 is Orlando Lucero. You wanted someone else to sneak in ahead of you too, Sam?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I want to thank you for all of your service. Just my comments will be very brief, very short. You know, I'm throughout the county, throughout the day, I'm still reacting in the community. And I hear people talking and I keep my mouth shut. And I just listen. But people are, they don't mind an ordinance of any kind, controlling gas or whatever, but they feel like they've been left out of the process. Some of the communities didn't even know about it till about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so my comments to the Commission were to involve a lot of the community, the Native American community, different communities in general, and before any action is taken. I'll just keep it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to Marie Haycock. Thank you for coming all the way from Sandia Park.
And as we were coming down Interstate 40, you would not believe the traffic backup because of a accident on 25.
Oh, bummer.
So we detoured and went through Coors Boulevard to get here, and we got here on time. But normally it's an hour drive for us. So
I imagine.
we're across the mountain in that forgotten
Wait, don't
land
start
over
our
there.
time yet.
Gentlemen, you are getting a copy of a study done by a resident in San Pedro Creek, the community that I live in. And I forgot, my name is Marie Haycock. I've been here before. Haycock. And I'm a resident of San Pedro Creek over in Sandia Park. What you have before you is a comparison of the existing Sandoval County draft ordinance with what we chose as two other ordinances in the state of New Mexico. I come from 24 years in an international business background. I'm very familiar with using what we call best practices, where you don't reinvent the wheel, you look around and you try to pick the best practices from other industries, other companies, other governments. And in doing this study that we put together ourselves, we have a civil engineer in our group, and he spent a lot of time doing this. He identified 36 parameters that are typically in best practices ordinances. And he took the existing draft ordinance, which is 10 pages long for Sandoval County, and he compared and contrasted that with Santa Fe and San Miguel ordinances. And he identified 36 parameters that are in a good practice, best practices ordinance on oil and gas. And if you look down the chart, and I hope you each have a copy of it in front of you. You haven't gotten it yet?
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me.
Yeah, we brought 50 copies, so there are some for the audience also. Okay, looking down the left side of the chart is a listing of the 36 parameters that we considered best practices. Sandoval County is in the middle, and Santa Fe County is listed, and then San Miguel County. Where you see the word none, there are 24 of those out of 36. In other words, 24 or 2/3 of the best practices were missing from the Sandoval County ordinance. I consider that almost malpractice, and I'm not here to belabor this or belittle what was done, but I honestly think whoever did the first ordinance, it's not a good resource for you, because they missed 24 very, very significant parameters. And I'll just ask you to skip down to maybe I think it's about number 10, an emergency response plan. There was nothing in the Sandoval County ordinance. There were in Santa Fe and San Miguel. And I personally sent to each of you today an email with a link to a fracking operation in Ohio where they had a tiny spill of 150,000 gallons of the refuse. But it's the stuff that comes back up out of the ground after they've done the fracking. Pardon? Brackish? Yeah, this was really horrible looking. Look for my name in your inbox and look at that, because it is just incredible. There was nothing in our plan to address that. Absolutely nothing. So, again, this is your homework for this evening or tomorrow. Seriously, among all the other things you have for homework. But I guess what I'm saying is, whoever did that first ordinance is not a good resource for you. You need someone or someones who will really put together an ordinance that is a best practice. You didn't get it? I will make sure you get it then. Thank you, Mr. Block.
Okay, Marie, thank you. So I'm surprised to see no one else on this list, so we will move ahead to commissioner comments. I'm sorry? Well, I could ask
Mr.
that.
Chairman, commissioners' comments?
Yes.
Can we start?
Yes.
What I've got to say is predicated on one fact, and I want to emphasize that my comments are a collection of talking to people and listening to people in District 1. All our efforts are predicated on the fact that the Albuquerque Basin Aquifer is very fragile due to the highly faulted and fractured nature of the Rio Grande Rift Valley. I'm going to talk about 4 elements that we've discussed: La Madera, Pina Blanca, Cochiti, and ask for my fellow commissioners to make comments, and then I would hopefully like to move those things into a motion. First off, and I've used the term before, stop work, but I think that's not the term that I want to use. What I'd like to do immediately is to recalibrate with New Mexico Tech. I'm guessing that they've spent about half of the $62,000. Would very much like to have the commission go back to New Mexico Tech, but go to the group that they should have gone to before, and that is the Hydrology and Aquifer Mapping Research Group. And let me say that again: Hydrology and Aquifer Mapping Research Group. What is being done right now is a look at those areas that are fertile for oil and gas. That's a secondary issue. The first issue is the protection of our water. We recommend that the 2 proposed ordinances do not go back to the Planning and Zoning Board. They disappear into the sunset somewhere. Secondly, we'd like to see a citizens working group put together. The group would consist of 7 to 9 average citizens from the county. No special interest groups would be allowed in. Staff could only offer support if requested. An independent chairman would lead the citizens working group. We'd like to ask the mayor of Rio Rancho, Bernalillo, and Cuba to recommend a citizen to us. Secondly, we'd like the Pueblos to offer up 2 representatives, a representative from Placitas, and my good friends on the forgotten side of the mountain, 1 representative, Algodones, Pina Blanca, and town of Cochiti. Also, at the request of the San Antonio de los Huertas land grant, to let them provide 1 person to be liaison to the organization. Lastly, and we've started this rather quietly, to begin immediate liaison with the City of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County Commission, the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority Board, try saying that fast, for the purpose of education and cooperation on the Albuquerque Basin, and ultimately to put together a regional-wide well monitoring system. Gentlemen?
Any other comments from the commission? Commissioner Bach, Commissioner Eichwald? Any discussion on these items?
I just want to make sure, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure I understand what we're discussing here. We're going to be voting on the future action of the oil and gas ordinance forwarded back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, right? Is that the Heil ordinance? Is that what we're looking at voting to send back to P&Z? Is that how I understand the text here, or am I missing it?
Well, the way this reads is says basically we're talking about future action on the oil and gas ordinance and whether to forward it back to planning and zoning. Commissioner Holden-Rhodes has offered some items for discussion as to how we might do that. So I'm looking for any other thought or comment from the commission about that.
So are we,
Or if you don't like his ideas at all, do you have an alternative, or how would you like to direct this?
so I think Commissioner Holden-Rhodes, are you asking us, sir, to vote on each specific one you have put forward, or as an aggregate?
Well, I would suggest that you might, if you're going to approach it that way, that you would do it piecemeal, because we might get to a conclusion. If you take it all as one bucket, you may get some no's here, whereas you might get some yeses for, I'm trying to get to
I'm just trying to understand
consensus as to a direction here.
Yes, sir. I'm just trying to understand Commissioner Holden-Rhodes' intent. If he wants to do this piecemeal or
It
as a
probably
whole.
makes most sense to do it piecemeal. That being said, then I would like to propose a motion that the two proposed ordinances not be sent back to the Planning and Zoning Board.
I will second that.
Okay. Do we have any further discussion on that?
I'm sorry, I will, so moved on that.
Mr. Chairman, well, Mike has some comments.
Wait, just a minute. We have a comment from staff here. He's here to answer questions.
Mr. Chairman, just a question. Which two ordinances are we talking about?
Stoddard and Heil.
So, to not send.
Can I make a comment?
And again, I use the term proposed
Yes,
ordinances.
that's what I'm looking for. Comments.
In relation to the last meeting, I didn't want to send Stoddard and Heil back to planning and zoning. I wanted the whole issue of oil and gas be sent back to planning and zoning for discussion and how we were going to go in forward on this. Right now, we do not have an ordinance, and everybody needs to understand that regardless of which way we look at it, if the state or the feds decide to give a permit, there's nothing we can do about it. They can come in and do whatever the heck they want. So it's important that everybody knows that that regardless of what we do, we need an ordinance to be able to protect ourselves. But I didn't say I wanted to send Stoddard and Heil back. I think I wanted to look at the whole issue of oil and gas and start from fresh.
And just for clarification, the motion is not sending oil and gas or Stoddard and Heil back to P&Z. It's what is our future direction on the ordinance, and whether we forward it back to planning and zoning or we do something else with it. So.
See, my opinion, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner Holden-Rhodes, is we do not send either ordinance back. The people have spoken, they've spoken very loudly, and the people have asked me through phone calls and emails and stopping me on the street basically is we want to wait until this New Mexico study is done. The people have said that. I will respect their wishes. I do not want to stop the study. We've paid for the study. I am more than willing to wait to see what the results of that study is. I don't see any value added in sending anything back to planning and zoning, because what are we sending back to them? Because we've already have been told by the people they want to see this New Mexico study before we press forward. And I agree with them. And when that study comes back in May, I would like to maybe take a look at it as a commission or even as a P&Z and see if there's any other areas or not that we feel might be lacking or we might have additional questions in that particular study. I think that's the fair way to look at it, just to have a cooling off period for everybody. Because you guys have asked, and you've been adamant about it, and I'm pretty sure I heard what you said. You guys said, we want to wait until the study comes out, don't vote for this ordinance. And that's what we did 4-1. So stopping New Mexico Tech from continuing the study is a mistake. We need to let that just run its course and not interfere with New Mexico Tech. As for the Citizens Committee that Commissioner Holden-Rhodes is talking about, the idea does have some merit. My only issue with that is that to me seems what the Planning and Zoning Commission is for. That's the quasi-judicial body for planning and zoning, and the oil and gas issue comes under that, and that's what they're there for, that's what they're appointed for, and they hold meetings on that, and they do represent the entire county. Now, do I think there needs to be some a better communication link with the tribal government? Yeah, absolutely, there needs to be that, because they hold a special place in this county, and they should be treated based on their history and culture in this county. So I won't support the Citizens Committee. I will support the body that is in charge, that has the area of responsibility for that, which is the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's what they're there for. Because I'm a little confused now between what's the difference between the Citizens Committee and the Planning and Zoning. Are we bypassing the P&Z for the Citizens Committee? I'm a little, I don't understand how we're going to kind of work that.
Two-part response to Commissioner Block. One,
Yes, sir.
We are in no way bypassing P&Z. Citizens Working Group would come back with recommendations that go to the P&Z. Secondly, I don't know how I justify to my people that we're spending money on a study that isn't what we originally asked for, and that was put together seemingly for the benefit of oil and gas, when at this point in time, if we could recalibrate and go back to the hydrology and aquifer mapping research group, maybe we could get $30,000 worth of water. Otherwise, we're going to get $60,000 worth of oil.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chapman.
can I make a suggestion? I think it would be appropriate for the director to explain to the commission what this quote-unquote report is, because it's not a study by any means, and explain where the data is coming from and what was the original idea behind asking for it to be done. Director.
And before you start talking, I'd like you to add one other item. And Commissioner Eichwald mentioned that we don't have an ordinance, so OCD could direct, drilling anywhere. Whereas I think we have a special use requirement. Could you clarify that also?
Yes, sir. To the ordinance requirements, we have a special use. The issue within the special use is that we have no criteria in which to process a special use, what to ask of an applicant or anything of that nature. So it's a special use, it's a holder, but there's no criteria upon which to judge the application by. No criteria for staff to engage with an applicant with in order to tell them what it is we want. So, and of course, what's going on right now is the 400 to 600. I'll just say 400 to 600. You never know from day to day how many wells are operating within the county. They are on federal or state land. They are outside of our jurisdiction, and those agencies do administrative permitting. And so it's going on right now. In terms of the assessment,
Could you clarify where it's going on?
in
Because when you say
Northwest,
going on, I mean, people say, well, it's going on all
Right.
over the county, but it isn't.
it's in Northwest Sandoval County. It's in the San Juan Basin. It's not in the Middle Rio Grande Basin. It's called the Middle Rio Grande Basin. There are two separate aquifers in our county, two separate sets of geology within our county, and to talk of the entire county as if it's a monolithic entity is incorrect. The assessment that we're doing, let me please go back into the history a little bit so I can explain it. People think that staff has just done this assessment. That is not the case. This assessment was discussed in May of 2017 when there was a work session of the County Commission to discuss oil and gas. The assessment, the letter from Dr. Romero was read into the record discussing the assessment. I don't know, as your staff, how you could discuss an item having to do with resources, whether it be petroleum or whether it be water, unless you study and find out what those resources are in the county. To map it, to identify it, to look at the geology of it. They're in different locations in terms of the geology. It's a big picture assessment looking at the entire county. The reason why the water side of it is less than the petroleum side of it is because New Mexico Tech has a good and sufficient database of aquifers throughout the entire state. They've already done that work. That work's already been done. The petroleum side of it has not. So there's more work that had to be done on that side of it to compare the two. And then the third component of it is to compare the current technology of production in the interface between those two resources and to look at that. I can tell you I've already talked to many geologists about this issue, and again, the county is split in two. The geology and the hydrology of the Middle Rio Grande is different than that of the San Juan Basin. I already know how that's going to come out. I've already talked to New Mexico Tech about this without interfering in that assessment, because I think that's important. The one thing that both of us agree on is science will drive this assessment. When they come and talk to you, it will be science that drives the information that they give you. I can't answer any more than that. They began work in July, and they have worked through, we're now in January, so you know they're 60% through, and we're going to be done with this assessment in May. That's the best I can explain that, Mr. Chairman.
And if you don't mind, Chairman, take it a step further, Director, if you would, and talk about similar studies that the county has done over the years, like this one.
Well, goodness gracious, we've studied almost the entire county when it comes to water resources. Water resources was the number one thing. The county understands that. The county has looked at water resources in two assessments that's been done in Placitas. An additional USGS water level analysis that's been done in Placitas, paid for by the USGS and the county. We've done Algodones, we've done Bernalillo, Bosque, we've done Jemez, we've done the Rio Rancho Estates. We have looked at the water resources and done analysis of the water resources almost throughout the entire county, except for the Cuba area. We hit all the big population areas first. The county has done all these studies. We've done deep water saline analysis. Now that was a study. That's one where the county actually went out and drilled holes and did hydrology studies to determine that resource, which in the future is going to be highly important to Sandoval County. So this is nothing new. It's similar to what we've done all over the county.
Well, Mike, if that's the case, and again you referenced July 17, I reflect back on a document from July 16, which further adds to the confusion. I think it's safe to say that oil and gas production could certainly continue to take place in the northwestern part of the county because the substrata is such, but it's not going to damage the aquifer. I think it's also safe to say and necessary to say that anything that takes place in the Rio Grande Rift Valley, and the reason that they call it the Rift Valley is because of the unique substructure, it's extremely fractured. So, a poor analogy, but in northwestern New Mexico, the substrata looks like this. Where we're sitting right now looks like this. And it stretches all the way from the forgotten side of the mountain over towards the Rio Puerco.
Right.
And all of those fingers feed the aquifer.
Right, we understand.
The Rio Grande Basin is already partially contaminated because of Kirtland Air Force Base.
Correct.
And that's going to be, hopefully there's remediation that they can do. But given the lay of the substrata, I think it's abundantly clear that there should never be horizontal drilling nor hydraulic fracking in the Rio Grande Rift Valley.
Commissioner Holden-Rhodes with that.
Sir.
Pearl. We need to take a little break so that people typing away in the back room are, so we're going to come back here at 5 after 9. That gives us a 7-minute break. Okay.
Yeah, when we come back.
Okay, we were, Commissioner Holden-Rhodes was finishing a comment on what the crowd thought was a high note. And, I said you were making a comment on what the attendance thought was a high note. And I wanted to allow the director to respond to what you were saying. Does that work? Do you remember where we were?
Oh, precisely, sir.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue of the Rio Grande Rift and the fracturing and the faults and everything like that, staff is highly aware of that issue. We believe that the assessment is going to call that out. We believe it has to call that out. It also has to call out, if our work order and our discussions are correct, the interface between the aquifer and the resource, if there is a resource. If there is a resource in the Middle Rio Grande, the interface between current technology and those two resources. We fully understand that. Our issue is that staff has learned this from many geologists. I'm sure the commission has talked to many geologists. We're dealing with the people who teach these geologists. We're dealing with a highly respected institution that teaches geologists how to do this type of work. So we're going to the source. Again, science will drive this. We're fully aware of the geology of both the Middle Rio Grande and the separate and distinct San Juan Basin. It's in a separate basin, separate aquifer, totally different from the Middle Rio Grande, does not mix, does not have an effect one on the other. We're aware of that. And we think the assessment will call that out. I haven't asked them specifically in that detail about that, but it's clear that the geology is totally different between the two. If I can go to a couple other issues, Mr. Chairman, just real quick.
Please.
The issue about citizens committees. You already have a citizens committee. It is the P&Z. It's been handpicked by this commission. And in fact, District 1 and District 5, it's weighted towards those two districts. Each of District 1 and each of District 5 has two planning commissioners on the planning commission. It's done that way because most of the county, most of the unincorporated county is rural and is in those two districts. So the planning commission is weighted towards those two districts. I talked to you at the budget session about if for some reason it is referred back to the planning commission, that we are proposing that we do a series of work sessions where work can get done, where more time is spent on actually dealing with these issues. And I don't see why citizens committees that have formed themselves cannot address the planning commission in that type of form, and they can be invited and they can be talked to. So I just bring that to your attention. Also, if I may, to disregard, and I know people call them the Stoddard and the Heil ordinance, but to totally disregard those two bodies of work, I think would be a disservice. If you look at all the work that's been done in the last year, there's a couple of things that have been done. One, and I need to go back to, if I could real quick, to best practices that was just brought up by the lady who brought that up, to look at what's out there. I gave a report to the county commission explaining that that's exactly what the staff did. We went out, and when we very first started this process, we took the ordinances that were in New Mexico. There's 3. 2 of them are in non-producing counties, Santa Fe and San Miguel. They don't produce anything. They're highly restrictive ordinances. They're meant to stop oil and gas in their counties. I don't care what people think. That's what they're there to do. We used a lot of material from those 2 counties when we first developed the staff's draft. We worked with OCD. We had a series of meetings with OCD. We met with their legal staff. They were filled with preemptive issues that are handled and done by the state. We removed those preemptive issues, and what you have right now on the record and still on the website is staff's draft free of preemptive issues. You also have SOPs, which we would go by now if anybody were to walk into the office right now and apply.
Mike, if I may, au contraire, how do you respond to that? We're missing all the pieces.
According to what? According to somebody who's looked at our ordinance and...
Not somebody, some people who have their act together.
Well, see, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
We get a lot of information. We get a lot of accusation. We get a lot of hypothesis. We get a lot of theory. None of it done in public. I don't know how this was done. I don't know what criteria.
Mike, let me address that. And I'm going to call you on the carpet. You put out a letter accusing me of accusatory statements, okay? You never had the courtesy to send it to me. You sent it to legal counsel. You sent it to the city manager, the county manager. Those accusatory comments were garnered face to face from the folks at New Mexico Tech, and they said, "Look, here's who we are. Here's where we aren't." And I don't appreciate the cheap shot.
I'm confused. on
Accusatory comments.
what- No, sir. I don't.
Commissioner Block was involved in that. It made all the rounds, but it never had the professional courtesy to come to me. And I would have told you, I didn't make them up. This is what Broadhead?
Ron Broadhead.
What the three people
I
at New
spoke to
Mexico
him.
Tech said. Here's who we are. And we have no time quoting them. We have no time to take a look at water.
Ron Broadhead is the geologist that's handling the petroleum side of the study. Mike Timmons is the project manager. He's the assistant dean or whatever of that school. He has assured me. You also saw the email back from New Mexico Tech then that basically, as I read it, the two departments don't talk to each other. And no one talked to the hydrologist down there. That's how I read the response.
Well, that makes me question their competence then.
Governmental agencies not talking to each other is nothing new, Commissioner.
Why did we not, from day one, and you in the former chair, 2 years ago, talked about water? Why didn't this thing go to the Hydrology and Aquifer Mapping Research Group first? Look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. People have figured that out. But the issue is water first. Oil and gas second.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the issue as I understand it, and I've been to almost every meeting having to do with this particular issue, has to be the effect of production of one resource on another resource. That's exactly what this assessment is set up to do, is to look at the effect of one resource's production on another resource. That's been the issue ever since this process began. And I don't know how you do that without identifying the resources and looking at the technology and the effect on the production of one resource on another. That's the best we can do.
It's a no-brainer. Sir, if I may finish. It's a no-brainer. Thrust Energy didn't go and lease 55,000 acres up on the escarpment because they thought Chicken Little was wrong. They did it because there's oil out there. And there darn sure is. That's not the issue. The issue is really very simple. Highly fractured. You see all the fingers that feed the aquifer to the rift? Any drilling in that area could contaminate the water. Period.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, that's exactly what the assessment is.
Well, I guess what I would like to do is get to a direction here, and maybe I could make a suggestion and see if that plays. I hear your suggestion, Commissioner Holden-Rhodes, about citizen input. I hear Commissioner Block's concerned about we already have a citizen committee. I would maybe make a suggestion that we give it back to the citizen committee, but with a plan, okay? And that plan be a series of workshops with the citizens that you're referring to, that we can talk about this over a period of time while they complete this study, which I'm assuming when they get all done with the assessment, we're going to have the water information and we're going to have the oil information, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. So while we're waiting for that study, we can start to form this plan, okay, as to how we would do it. It also gives us a little bit of cooling off period in terms of how we attack this. So, your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please.
I'm trying to figure out how I want to go about discussing this, but I'm the only commissioner on this commission that has been here since day one when this whole process started. And for those of you that weren't here, I want you to know that this process, and I think Director Springfield can vouch for this, has been driven by the public since day one. I mean, there were the public hearings that were held with Sandridge applied, and that was kind of the beginning of the entire thing. In fact, I can think of some folks now that I didn't know then that I know now, and they were all involved in the process, whether it was planning and zoning or if it was the county commission. Alan Friedman, Lou Fisher, Mike Neese, Elaine Chimino, Mary Feldblum. I mean, all of these folks that we've seen here time and time again didn't just come to county commission meetings. They went to planning and zoning meetings too, and workshops, and participated in the process. So, you know, you're talking about a process that culminated here with almost 2 years, not quite 2 years, but almost 2 years worth of effort. I want to agree with Director Springfield. I think it's a disservice to the citizen taxpayers of Sandoval County to know that there's been in excess of 1,000 man-hours dedicated to trying to develop an oil and gas ordinance. The county, when I hear the proposal of, monitoring wells and so on and so forth, the challenge with that is, you got to hire the people to do it. You got to have the budget to do it. You have to have the smarts to do it, to know what you're doing. And, it's just not something that the county's, number one, equipped to do, or number two, has the money to do. So, when you consider everything that's transpired in regards to this initiative to craft an ordinance, you kind of end up where we were, with an ordinance that is not good enough for some people in the room and doesn't go far enough. And I think Director Springfield touched on it quite eloquently earlier when you talk about the ordinance in Santa Fe and San Miguel counties. There is no oil and gas operations there. The reason why is they got a 200-page onerous ordinance that keeps the industry out of there. The hypocrisy, though, with all that is when the tax dollars come rolling in from the oil and gas industry, they take that money they readily take that money. And every county in the state does. And so, you know, and I don't want this to be about economics, but I will say this, and to me it's an educational piece. It's an educational piece for this commission, because clearly Commissioner Holden-Rhodes doesn't know everything that he needs to know in regards to what happens when an operator goes to the state of New Mexico and says, I want to drill in a particular area. And I think Director Springfield can add to the discussion on this. If it's an area that is particularly sensitive and might be a little bit riskier than your standard fare, there are special requirements that are put on that operator to provide a plan on how to protect the water, the most precious resource that the state of New Mexico has. And, you know, you hear wild comments about, you know, contamination and so on and so forth. I wish that I could say that the world was free of, you know, incidents or accidents or you know, whether it's oil and gas or any other industry for that matter. But one thing that I'm pretty sure you can't do is legislate out that possibility. That's impossible unless you pass an ordinance like they have in Santa Fe County, where there is no oil and gas because nobody wants to come there because they don't want to go through, or they can't afford to go through the process of even drilling there. So, but the point I really want to make is this. This has been a very, very public process where the public has been involved since day one. In fact, how we ended up where we were is because the public directed us to do that. In fact, I remember at one point last year when there was a ordinance that was being talked about at the time, special use ordinance at the time, and the public said, absolutely not, we don't want that. With SOPs and everything, the public said, no, absolutely not. We want an ordinance. We want an ordinance. We do not want a bunch of SOPs. So, you know, there's a lot of history out there on this. It's accessible. Not all the P&Z meetings were being videotaped back then, but the reality is there are minutes available, I assume, and so you can go back and look at all this. And yeah, I mean, I agree with Director Springfield. I think it's wrong to throw all of this work away. And just remember one thing: you had a volunteer citizens board that interacted with the public every step of the way to craft this ordinance. And that's how you ended up with what we ended up. And I know it's not going to please everybody. There's a lot of people that would just soon there be an ordinance that was so onerous that there would never ever be another well drilled in Sandoval County. But and I've heard a lot of talk about renewable energy and so on and so forth. And there's a place for renewable energy in the portfolio, if you will, of energy that we require to live our daily lives. But I got to tell you, there ain't a person in this room that's not touched by the oil and gas industry. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you live in the county. You are touched every day by this industry, from the seats that you're sitting on right now to the car that you drove to get here at tonight's meeting. And oil and gas, unfortunately, for me and all of you, is part of the energy portfolio. And I doubt seriously in my lifetime or yours that it's going to go away. So it's one of those things that you want to try and live with it. And that's why I said the night that we were voting on the ordinance that for me it was better to have at least some measure of an ordinance on the books than nothing at all. You know, going forward, you can always, and this board has the authority, as does the P&Z board, to go back in and look at something a second time if it's warranted. So that was the reason why I voted for the ordinance that night. And I know a lot of people find fault with that, but for me, I personally would rather have at least some accountability of the industry to the county, and I know a little bit more about what they're doing than nothing at all, and which is kind of where we are right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I appreciate those comments. However, I don't know that it's accomplishing. I know that's good history, and the fact that we do have history on this, but somehow we need to figure out how we're going forward to try and get to an ordinance that apparently was not satisfactory to this commission, based on some information that we heard. So how do we get to the next step? Okay, and part of the reason, or part of the objective, is I see that planning and zoning take on this responsibility, get those citizens involved that are expressing concern, do it in a workshop fashion rather than the dais and the 3-minute conversation. Select a group of people that can have a good dialogue, and come back with something that we can vote on, that addresses the concern that I have the same concern, by the way, of the Rio Grande Rift and the Rio Grande Aquifer area. But there's other parts of the county that are producing and have been for years. So we need to come back with. I think one of the problems that we had is this whole issue of don't bifurcate the county. Well, I think that was a big mistake. We should have recognized that there's areas of the county we shouldn't be drilling in, especially when you take a look at the map.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Please.
You had the presence of mind 2 or 3 meetings ago to talk about exclusionary zones. And forgive me, because hopefully I didn't mislead you. We need an oil and gas ordinance. As Mr. Chapman pointed out, this industry is the most highly regulated in the country. And between the feds and the state, they have about almost 90% of the regulations, okay? One of the issues is the inability of the state of New Mexico, OCD, to enforce those. So we don't go off spiraling till 2 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recommend that we take your suggestion. I want to be absolved from telling the people in District 1 that we're going to spend more money for something that we really can't use. But I would like to see the citizens group put together with representatives appointed, selected by the various communities, by the mayors, and so that we get a good cross-section, that it be a tight group, that it has good leadership, and that it brings back its recommendations May, June timeframe, and then hopefully we will have, again, something out of New Mexico Tech that's usable only if we recalibrate, and then hand it back to the P&Z and let them do their job.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, can I make a suggestion?
yeah.
Okay, I want to look at the agenda item as it's specifically worded. It says discussion and consideration to direct planning and zoning staff and commission on future action of the oil and gas ordinance. Forward it back to the planning and zoning commission. It's in my mind, it's not quite worded right, because I think the intent Commissioner Eichwald had when he first proposed that we put this on the agenda was that the commission would make a decision about sending the whole effort back to planning and zoning, kind of starting over, which I don't support, simply because planning and zoning's done their job. They worked at it for a year and a half. I know they worked really hard at it. I can see there's a planning and zoning commissioner in the back of the room that spent one night, I think, up until, I don't know, pretty close to the midnight hour, just crafting the language that ended up being in the ordinance. I don't see, a citizens group where the citizens have had total access to this whole process since day one and have been engaged and involved. Forming a citizens group when you already have a citizen group that's represented by the Planning and Zoning Board. But let me make a suggestion here, and maybe we can move beyond discussion tonight on this subject. If in fact the assessment, not a study, if in fact the assessment is going to shed any light on what should be done in terms of an ordinance in Sandoval County, then why not wait for the assessment then? Just go ahead and wait for the assessment, keep the ordinance, and let's call it the Sandoval County Oil and Gas Ordinance. It never really got amended. As I remember, Mr. Chair, at the end of the day, you couldn't support your own amendment of it. So if we've got a Sandoval County Oil and Gas Ordinance where a lot of work and a lot of effort has been put in. Why that's important to realize is because everything's been kind of vetted already in terms of where the county can go statutorily, all the other entities that regulate the industry and what they do. And to me, if you really want to move this beyond today, I suggest this commission do a workshop, because apparently there's a couple of commissioners who don't understand, you know, who regulates what and what can be done by the county
Mr.
statutorily.
Chapman, I resent that. You
Yeah,
don't
I
have
figured you would.
clue
I figured you would.
Gentlemen,
I
as
figured you
far
would.
as the fact that water is the issue. And you're giving us the same mantra. And let me respond to your question about the P&Z.
I'm just
If a
making a
man of
suggestion.
John,
I'm just making a suggestion.
if
You
the
know,
chairman of the P&Z,
Hey,
who'd been here for 25
I
years,
think I had the
we
floor.
only have one floor
Mr.
at a
Chairman.
time. Commissioner Holden-Rhodes, Commissioner Chapman, finish your comments and then let Commissioner Holden-Rhodes speak.
So yeah, I mean, I know this is a contentious issue, and you know I learned a lot about this in the process with workshops that we had, watching planning and zoning go through the process themselves. And the thing that I've learned to realize is, yeah, there's water, yeah, there's oil, yeah, there's gas. We all understand that's out there. But the point is, we're talking about an ordinance, and we're trying to craft an ordinance and pass an ordinance so that there is some accountability of the industry to the county. And other than just trying to shut them down, I mean, that's where you're going to end up, is with an ordinance. So I was going to propose, Mr. Chairman, that if there is a consensus amongst the commission that you want to wait for this assessment, then so be it. Wait for the assessment. But I wouldn't throw away, like Director Springfield's suggesting, a lot of work that's been done. At taxpayer expense, by the way, in excess of 1,000 man-hours, I think you said at one time, that's been dedicated to this. So and here's one other thing, and I want to say it because it's painfully obvious to me, having been involved since day one. There's no way we're going to pass an ordinance where we can satisfy everybody. That's pretty obvious. So we're doing the best we can with what we got, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Holden-Rhodes.
when a man of the caliber of John Arango quits because you, Mr. Chapman, tried to push the Stoddard ordinance into
Commissioner Holden-Rhodes,
Then
I want to make progress towards solving this thing,
Yes, sir.
not back up. So let's look at what we can do to get to a consensus of what a solution is moving forward.
Sir, again, I would suggest that we take precisely what you said, turn it into a motion, and let's vote on it.
Well, so what I said was in essence to give it back to P&Z, have them set up workshops that would include citizens of the community to get the input, not in a dais scenario, but all people around the table talking about the issue, and come back with the solution. Also wait for the assessment while we're kind of gathering information. Somehow we need to get off the dime here to move to some solution, okay? And I'm hearing differing opinion that I don't know that we will get all the votes. So, Commissioner Chapman, before you speak, Commissioner Block, did you have something to say?
No, Mr. Chairman,
No,
I'm ready to
thought you
move
were
forward.
trying to
I think
get your
everybody's
2
ready to move
cents worth
forward.
in there. Okay.
I would just like to add to the discussion about what you're proposing here to planning and zoning it's just way too vague, it's way too nebulous. I mean, there's been umpteen hours of public discussion and public discourse with the Planning and Zoning Commission and so on and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make, Chairman, is if you're going to do something like that, send it back to Planning and Zoning. I think you got to be a little more specific as to what it is you're trying to accomplish. I mean, you can have Planning and Zoning meetings infinitum with the public and discuss this until your face falls off. But the point is, what's the goal in sending it back other than just public discourse? I think you got to be a little more specific than that, considering that there's already been almost a 2-year-long process to craft an ordinance.
I would entertain a motion to wait for the assessment, and then we'll talk about it.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on that motion? Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Commissioner Block,
Aye.
Commissioner Holden-Rhodes, Commissioner Chapman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Eichel,
Yes.
Chair Heil.
Yes. Any other? Okay, thank you. Hopefully in that process, by the way, Planning and Zoning Board, I would like you to come back with a plan as to how we would address more community input, okay? Because you're going to have it once you get the assessment plan back so that we can satisfy the issues with regard to the community members that want to provide input to this plan, okay? Okay, moving right along. Somebody calling me?
Okay, no discussion.